Hello students, my name is Kate. I work here at Sandy Creek Nature Center, and today I'm going to take you on a little virtual hike to learn about a few plants, and if we see some other cool things along the way, we'll stop and look at that too. So the first thing I wanted to share with you today is our managed forest. And behind me I have, you can see some taller pine trees way in the back, and then I also have a few smaller pine trees a little closer to me. Now, along our hike today, we're going to talk about different types of plants. So I just wanted to point out one particular type that we have here at the Nature Center. This is where we actually did a clear cut a few years ago, and we cleared all of the trees that were in this area and started from scratch. So we had grasses that popped up, there's some briars behind me, and then we planted some loblolly pine trees. Now, since you are studying about inherited traits, that goes for plants too. These pines that we planted are ones that we bought that were supposed to be kind of the best of the best. So they came from some of the tallest and straightest growing trees, very healthy trees, maybe compared to some forests that had crooked trees or maybe had diseases or more prone to disease. So by picking seedlings from or seeds from trees that have grown tall and straight, we have a chance of having some better quality trees growing out here. Now, conditions might always change that, but starting off with good traits is going to help get these trees to grow a little faster. So we'll take a look at some of these trees, and then in a few minutes we're going to stop at another area where we planted a different type of tree. So in one area along our trail, you may come into another open area that was clear cut. And in this space, instead of planting pines, we planted a tree called the American chestnut. Now, you may have read about this in history books, but the chestnut, the American chestnut, used to cover the entire eastern coast of the United States. So you'd find it from Georgia all the way up into New England area. And these were massive trees, huge. You couldn't even put your arms around them. They were so big. And unfortunately, there was something called the chestnut blight that came in and began killing off the trees. So between logging and the blight, these trees quickly took a decline and have been extinct pretty much from our ecosystem for over 100 years now. Scientists, biologists are working on coming up with some chestnuts that can be resistant to the blight. So remember those inherited traits that we were talking about before? So they are mixing American chestnuts with some Chinese chestnuts, and they do this in a way so they will kind of have a chestnut, American chestnut and a Chinese chestnut growing in an area together, and then they collect the seeds that would come from that. And then they can see kind of what level, by genetics, they can study what level is there. And then they will breed those again, and they'll keep doing that until you just have a little bit of the Chinese chestnut and more of the American chestnut in the mix. So that way we still have more of a native tree, but just enough of the Chinese hybrid to make it resistant to the blight. And so we, in this area, we have started planting these to try to see if we can be part of that experiment and see if we can get any of these chestnut trees to grow. The trails, you will also find a lot of different vines here at Sandy Creek Nature Center. This one in front of me is one that is safe to touch, but don't swing on it, no Tarzan when you're walking. We don't want to pull these out of the treetops, which is where they're growing to. But this one is a muscadine vine, or a wild grape vine that you can find. And one way you can tell these is that it has kind of a rough looking bark, and then it has these long tendrils that hang down from the vine. And these are aerial roots, and what they do is they help to bring water up to the top of the plant. So it's collecting water from the atmosphere rather than just from the ground, because it grows all the way up. It takes a long time for that water to reach the top. And so these aerial roots can help to provide that moisture as the vine gets taller and taller. Now when these go to the top of the tree, they're trying to grow towards the sunlight, and then after that the leaves will come out, and in the fall and kind of late summer you will start to see the muscadine grapes all around. Usually we don't see them until they fall to the ground though, so we can't really eat them at that point. Now when we're walking along, we see lots of plants, but sometimes there are plants growing on top of other plants. This green fuzzy stuff that is growing on the tree here is one such plant. That is moss. It is fine to touch, but a lot of times people don't realize it's another plant. Now, what's different about moss than the tree is that moss does not have any root system. So it can grow on something like bark, it can grow on a rock, or it can just grow on the ground. It takes its water in from the top. So when it rains, it can soak in the moisture that way. Now we have reached the North Oconee River. As we're walking along the river, we start to see plants that like more water. And one such plant is this one that's growing along the edge that looks kind of like bamboo, but it's our native version. This is called river cane. And we like to see this river cane growing because it helps to make the banks a little bit more stable. So when we have floods, the roots help to hold the bank in place. The soil doesn't wash away as easily. So this plant is actually a really good one to have. And you can see it's growing all along the edge next to the river. So I'm going to kind of scan up just to give you a little better sense of what the river looks like here. Kind of scan back and forth. And you can see there's a lot of trees that grow along the river and also fall in the river sometimes. And the water level's pretty high. We've had a lot of rain over the winter. Now, are there plants that live in the water? Of course. There's a lot of algae that will also grow in certain parts, but we don't notice it as much this time of year because of the season. So a lot of things have kind of died off and will come back here in the spring. So we'll start to see things green up here pretty soon. Along a lot of our trails, you'll find these trees that have fallen over. You'll notice there's some water in the background of this picture or this video, and we are close to the river still. And a lot of times when there's a lot of water, then the tree roots aren't very deep. They're pretty shallow. So you can see this one standing up, the roots met more out to the side than straight down. So when high winds come along, these trees start to fall over. So this would be a difference between the pine trees that we saw earlier that have a really long taproot that goes straight down into the ground, and versus these trees in the wetland area that have a more shallow root system. So remember the words we used earlier. Would this be a vascular system or a non-vascular system? It would be a vascular system since it has the roots. And you can see there are some other plants growing on top, including even a little bit of moss, which is the non-vascular. So if you see the light green along the top and along the side, that's a moss that has taken up residence on top of that tree trunk. For our last stop on our hike today, I wanted to stop to point out something that everybody should be familiar with when they're out on the trails. This hairy looking vine that is climbing up this tree in multiple places is poison ivy. So poison ivy, of course, is a plant. It is a type of vine that can grow. It's native here to Georgia, and it likes to grow straight up on trees, or it can grow just on the ground. But we'll often see the vines in the wintertime more than the other parts because they are hairy looking, and those hairs are actually roots that help it to climb up the tree. That part stays all year, but the leaves are deciduous and they fall off in the fall. So we don't get to see them throughout the year. So it makes it a little harder to recognize, but it is good to know when you're out walking not to take a rest and put your hand against one of these hairy looking vines. Well, that concludes our trail walk today. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see any animals along the hike today. Everything was pretty quiet. Might have heard a few birds in the background, but nothing that I could catch on camera. So we'll have to just have you come out and visit the Nature Center with your families. Come take a hike, come visit our exhibit hall, and you can see some of the other things that are out here at the Nature Center. So thank you for joining me on our virtual hike today, and I hope that we'll see you soon. Bye!